down in the South Bronx, we're working to bring new public parkland and open space to the Harlem River waterfront through public-private partnerships. Yay. And of course, there's so much more in the works. And we have some very exciting announcements coming soon, so please stay tuned. The team at New York City Parks has been working tirelessly on these projects and many others, and I'd like to thank them and their fearless leader here in the Bronx, Borough Commissioner Jessina Aponte, who's with us this morning. And I really want to thank all of her Bronx team, Mike Ortiz, Larry, so much good work, so many great parkies. I know one important parkie who's not here this afternoon, but she's with us in spirit, Iris Rodriguez Rosa, would have loved to have been here. But I promised that I would represent and send her regards, so know that Iris is with us in spirit, and could not be happier to have her as my first deputy helping to run the agency. But of course, none of this work would be possible without the many contributions from the diverse communities that make up the Bronx and that make the Bronx so great. So to all the advocates, community members, and volunteers who are here today, thank you for your commitment to Bronx Parks. Know that I and we at the Parks Department thank you so much, appreciate your good work, and we couldn't do it without you. You are vital to the future of the city's green spaces, and we are so appreciative. So now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Bronx Borough Commissioner for New York City Parks, Jessina Aponte. Jessie.
Thank you, Commissioner Donahue. Thank you, Ed. Good afternoon, fellow Bronxites. I'm ecstatic to be joining you at the 29th Annual Bronx Speak Up. I am Jessina Aponte, your Bronx Borough Commissioner. Can I just say, thank you. Can I just say that I am amazed by this event. I heard from so many people about Speak Up. It's my first. About how great it is and the dynamic of the attendees. Let me tell you that those reports were all underestimated. In one room, we have every single Friends of group and park advocate. There are groups here that represent parks and green spaces from every single corner of the Bronx and every single one of our waterways too. I want to personally thank you all for your dedication and hard work as volunteers and advocates for our parks and green spaces. As a parkie for the last 22 years and a born and raised Bronxite who still resides and raised my children here, I can tell that the Bronx is greener, healthier, and more environmentally friendly, and it's thanks to all the hard work that you are all doing. I don't want to take too much of your time up, but I do look forward to hearing about your ideas about greenways and connecting the Bronx through greenways. Thank you to the Bronx Speak Up Planning Committee. Thank you, Nilka, Christina, and Maria Luisa, and every single one of our parks advocates that advocate for a healthier Bronx every day. I want to also thank Lehman College for hosting us and Con Edison for sponsoring us. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of Speak Up.
Thank you so much, Yesenia. So we have a little surprise video for you guys. As mentioned before by Commissioner Donahue, Iris Rodriguez Rosa couldn't make it, but she sent us a short message since she can't be here.
Good day, everyone. My name is Iris Rodriguez Rosa. I'm the first Deputy Commissioner in New York City Parks. Some of you may know me as your former Chief of Recreation in the Bronx or the former Borough Commissioner of the Bronx. I am heartbroken that I'm not able to be there with you today as I have a commitment out of town, but you know that I'm there with you in spirit. I want to congratulate all the community organizations, all the individuals, and all the Friends of groups who year after year come to this event to be able to share their desires of improving our open spaces, our environments, and our parks and playgrounds. I will tell you that I have been committed to working with you throughout the years, and I will continue to do so. And today, you have Commissioner Sue Donahue with you today, who will also, as I have, be able to appreciate all the hard work and all the commitment that all of you have. I wish you a wonderful day and be able to enjoy, and I look forward to seeing you out there in the borough.
Now, we're going to start heading into our panel discussions, but before we do that, I just want to echo what both Jasenia and Commissioner Donahue mentioned about the hard work that's done by all the park organizations and the Friends groups. We have major things to celebrate. For example, we have, Van Cortlandt Park, they're finally going to daylight Tibbetts Brook, and that's something that happened through the grassroots efforts of the community members and everyone that got together. This year, we also celebrated dolphins coming into the Bronx River, and that's something, we have wildlife coming back into the Bronx. So these things are things that happen because of each and every one of you that are so intimately involved with with the environment, with your local parks groups. Keep it up, because a lot of the changes that we see happening in our borough, they happen because of you. It didn't happen because, someone in Washington may have been thinking about these ideas. No, these are your voices being heard that are transforming our borough today. So let's move on to our panel discussions. Our first one is going to be Greenways. Greenways, they've been a long time coming, and it's going to be headed by Dave Lutz and Dart Westfall, and they're members of the 1993 Bronx Greenway Committee.
Hi, everybody. Dave, where's Dave? And we need Diane Sargent and Dave Lutz to come up to the front, please. There we go. All right, so thanks, everybody. I'm Dart Westfall. I was on the committee back in, I don't need this now, back in 93. And as you see, here's the group up here. This is the group. Diane Sargent, who was coming up in the green hat. Let's give her a round of applause. She chaired the thing 30 years ago. And Dave Lutz was with the Neighborhood Open Space Coalition at the time, and it was his idea to have this, okay, getting the Bronx Coalition and and Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan and Staten Island coalitions for open space was Dave's idea. And of course, no other borough does it except us. So let's have a hand for us. All right. So we've got about 15 minutes to talk to you about how it all came to pass. I'm going to do the intro, and then these two are going to reminisce a little bit. And then there'll be a panel a little bit later, and you have the names of the panelists on the back of the agenda, so please read their bios and understand where they're coming from. We won't have to spend a lot of time on introductions. And the panel will be speaking about, and there will be a survey about, the maps you see around on the wall. Now, those maps are from the 2007 update to the Greenway Plan of '93, which was, I chaired the committee, but it was basically done by Paula Kaplan. I don't think is here today, but so that's where those maps all came from. It came from the same plan, which is here. And I just want to say one thing about this list of people. Some of the incredible leadership from the women of the Bronx. I mean, if you look in the middle, Eugenia Flato was a civic leader of the city of New York for decades. An amazing person was Jeannie Flato. Irma Fleck started the Bronx Museum, the Bronx Council on the Arts, the Bronx Frontier Development Corporation, South Bronx Urbanization Task Force, an amazing human being. Terry Keller started Bronx Green Up. Teresa Leto started the Bronx Council for Environmental Quality, and many of us would not be environmentalists without Teresa. And if you look, there's a lot of Bronx Council for Environmental Quality people's names here, including Jorge Santiago, who I'll talk about in a second. Angel Vasquez is here with the Boy Scouts, but he was actually a BCEQer. My name is up here with Marshall Preservation, but I was really here because of BCEQ. BCEQ is the fiscal sponsor for this event and works with the Bronx Coalition. So let's give it up for a second for BCEQ, please. All right. So this all started, and there's a lot of these books lying around. You can get the history here, but I'll be really fast about this. This all started because Community Board 3. Anybody here from Community Board 3? Any Board 3 people? Any Crotona people? Yeah, we got one. All right. Well, yes, whose name is on the list as well. Let's not forget. Right, to introduce Dr. James Fairbanks, whose name is up here and who's sitting right over there. Now, Board 3 was doing a 197A plan, which is the general plan for a community district area. And they had a group called the Consumer Farmer Foundation, now known as the Porodnik Foundation, Jeannie Flato and Harry DiRienzo, do a plan for the South Bronx Greenway. This was in 1988 or 89. And it was a way to connect Crotona Park with the other parks in the Bronx by way of the different parkways, can you say greenways, that went to the Bronx Zoo and maybe to Claremont Park. It's not really a greenway anymore, but connecting those things so people could get to the parks in the South Bronx. And they went to the borough board, and the borough board and the borough president then, in like 1990, said this is going to be a Bronx-wide greenway, not just a South Bronx greenway. And so this plan got started because of Community Board 3 on the grassroots wanting to do a plan for their neighborhood. And it expanded to this that's been going on for 29 or 30 years ever since. So I think that's really important as the first thing to remember. But greenways go back a lot farther than that. So can you see this? How do I make this thing be a slideshow? Slideshow, duh, from beginning. Okay. So here we have, Dave and I found this on a bicycle 30 years ago. This is the way to get to Randall's Island. This is the Randall's Island connector, right? And it's something we've been working on since we did this plan back in '93. So that's just the opening. All right, so this is a really hard to see map of the Bronx when they invented the Bronx Park System, which was in 1884. And there were parkways, right? This is Pelham Parkway and Mosholu Parkway. Back in 1884, we were thinking about connecting the green spaces. Frederick Law Olmsted had this idea. They built them in Brooklyn first at Ocean Parkway and Eastern Parkway to Prospect Park. But they were a city then. They had more money than we had. So by the 1880s, we were doing this here in the Bronx, and we've been working on it ever since. This is the Mosholu Pelham Greenway, built within those parkways that were created in the 1880s in, I think, the Beam administration. It's the first real modern greenway in the city, and it was done during the 1970s. And it's still there, and it's actually expanding into the actual bed of the street. Thank you, DOT, wherever you are. And that's what's going on in there. Now, this letter, where's Jorge Santiago? Where is he? Come on, Jorge. You said you'd stand up. Wave at everybody, Jorge, over there. Jorge said, yeah, give it up for Jorge. Jorge Santiago was also on the list with BCEQ, but also worked with the Boy Scouts and did a lot of stuff. And if you're on his email list, you're a lucky person. If you're not, you should find him and get him to put you on his email list, because there's all kinds of astonishing things that happen. And he was the corresponding secretary of the Bronx Council for Environmental Quality back then, and he got this letter from DEC. Now, we're all working on infrastructure things and all kinds of federal funding, but way back then, getting highway money, which is what they used to call infrastructure money, into other kinds of open space was a really heavy lift. And a senator named Moynihan got that to happen, and it was the congestion management and something else called CMAQ, and there were enhancements dollars. And this in 1994, DEC wrote to who in the Bronx? To Jorge. Does you think you could get some people together from BCEQ to talk about doing a Bronx River Trailway in 1994? Our plan had just come out in '93, and people were saying, okay, how are we going to implement this? And there was the first place to get money for it, for what would become the Bronx River Greenway and the Bronx River Alliance and everything else from it. It started with a letter to Jorge. I don't know what to tell you. All right. So there will be a survey later. And I'm sorry, yeah, he's laughing at me because I'm really tired of visioning people, I got to tell you. After 30 years of this, I am so tired of going to visioning meetings. You guys go have your visioning and let me know what you come up with, and I'll be in favor of it. But anyway, there will be a survey later about what you think greenways are, and we're going to ask this group to talk about greenways and what we think about them. But here's some quick definitions. DOT says that they run through parks and streets and provide safe and accessible green corridors for active recreation and non-motorized transportation. It's not a tight definition. I mean, it's not an official definition, but it's the way they describe it in their website. The first separated bike paths were in 1894 along Ocean Parkway. In 1888, there's the Bronx situation. And then the Greenway offers a safe place for bicyclists, walkers, runners, and more of all ages and abilities to commute, exercise, and visit new destinations. That's on the East Coast Greenway website. We're part of the East Coast Greenway. From Maine to Florida, it goes through the Bronx. In fact, I think of all the East Coast Greenway places, the Bronx is the only place where it's all off-road in the entire country. As far as I could, well, that's, for a whole state, right? Anyway, so we've got the East Coast Greenway. And then finally, here's the subsequent idea about a South Bronx Greenway, which is kind of where all this started, that was done by Sustainable South Bronx and our friend Majora Carter. And there you have it. So with that, we got about 7 or 8 minutes left. I'm going to take this microphone off because people tell me that if I don't do that, BronxNet won't be able to hear us. And I'm going to ask Dave to tell a quick story and tell us what a Greenway is.
Well, very quickly, we at the Neighborhood Open Space Coalition at that time were putting together Greenway opportunities for New York. It began with something, the Brooklyn Queens Greenway Study. I was not part of the coalition then, but I got a copy of this study because of my work in the city. And I looked at it and said, what about that rail corridor that goes across Brooklyn? It's not in here, and it's empty. That's now called BQX. They're planning to do a trolley system through it. It's still not a greenway. Could be picked up by somebody. Dart, I met Dart because he had another idea. It was, what about the Bronx? And we got together and we started talking about opportunities for the Bronx. And all those opportunities began to coagulate into a Greenway plan for New York City. And at that time, I was working with the Department of City Planning to get this put together. And I was working with a committee of people like Dart all over the city. And we were looking at Greenway opportunities around the city. The people at the Department of City Planning, not knowing that ICE-T funding was down the line, said, we haven't got a chance in hell of getting this done unless it was part of something bigger. Okay, we started working on the East Coast Greenway project, Maine to Florida. At that time, it was Boston to Washington, D.C. And we started working on Greenway opportunities even in New Jersey. People have picked up on some of those opportunities, and they're being still worked on to this day. But nowhere in this region have I seen the energy that has come out of the Bronx. And I congratulate all of you for putting that energy together and keeping this torch going.
And our third, now this is how this stuff works, right? I ran into Diane in the drugstore the other day, and I said, I've been looking for you. You should come and say something. I also asked Jorge, but he, too modest, he wouldn't talk. But, so it was so funny, and here we are. Diane Sargent was the chair of the effort to do a Bronx Greenway those years ago, and let's see what she remembers.
Yes. All right, thank you, and thank everyone for being here today. This is amazing. We had a vision about having a place, and all diverse people from the Bronx would be here, would get a chance to talk to our elected officials. And when that idea was brought up, I'm like, yes, they're all going to come to see us, or come listen to what we have to say. That maybe, that was just a dream, but it wasn't. And it turned into hundreds of people coming to this event. But back in the 90s, I'm sorry, in the 80s, I was active on my community board, and I got an opportunity to be the parks chairperson. This was Community Board 8. As a chairperson, I'm always looking for things that will, enrich the experience for our members. And I remember seeing something about oh, they're talking about money for greenways. And I'm like, what are greenways? I have to say we stretched the definition of what a greenway is, because, you know, your first thought is going to be, oh, there's got to be a lot of grass, there's got to be shrubs and maybe trails. But we stretched it. There was bikes could be there, and I'm trying to think. The creative one was to have be able to get community gardens to be part of the effort as well. The piece that still is, I think, even a challenge today is the idea of greenways like crossing over regular sidewalks or roadways. I forgot, I mean, Dave was saying, I'm not sure we covered that one all the way, but that's a challenge that, you know, in an urban setting, definitely still could be done a little better. So the idea of having a greenway, I'm going to the one of the borough board meetings, and there I mentioned something about the greenways, but it looked like there was already an effort moving around the city. I'm not saying the Bronx was the creator of everything, but it was other boroughs. Yes, there were other boroughs doing efforts, Queens, maybe Brooklyn, but the Bronx, I think we were trying to get to be at the head of it, but that it wasn't a competitive effort. So the Greenway, most of the work was being done by BCEQ, and particularly Jorge would have mounds and mounds of papers and stories. Uh-oh, is my 3 minutes up? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay, let me make it quick, because there's 2 stories I'd like to tell. A quick one, Teresa Leto was a very active member of BCEQ. She taught me about recycling. There weren't many black and brown people active with green, with the environment, but she sent me a letter where she had written on the back of another letter that she had, and that was recycle. That's one of the early efforts at recycling. I'm like, oh, that poor thing. She can't afford stationery. I think I'm going to have to send her some. But I learned that was recycling. Okay, and recycling, reuse, those concepts. We were also hopeful that when we could bring these greenways to the various parts of the Bronx, in some way maybe we would also start discussions about other efforts taking care of the environment. So that's my 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to introduce someone from DOT for 1 minute to give us a note of something. Margot Grew. Margot Grew is here, and just to end up this Greenway thing, we're going from the past into the future here, so Margot's going to tell them something quick about the future.
Thank you, Dart. Good afternoon. I'm Margot Grew. I am an assistant director in the DOT bicycle unit. And I keep saying we are in a Greenways moment right now. Like Commissioner Donahue mentioned, we got over $7 million in federal funding for Greenway planning. And in addition, we're seeing a groundswell of support from community members, as evidenced by you all being here today. We at DOT, along with our colleagues at Parks and EDC, are planning for the next generation of greenways, specifically focusing on underserved areas. And as you know, for too long, Bronx residents have been disconnected from the waterfront. And we think that the Harlem River in particular presents a great opportunity for greenway planning. Not just for for both forging connections east and west to the waterfront, but also starting to envision what new transportations would look like along the waterfront. So we're excited to be with you here today, and we're going to be coming back to you in the next month with some exciting news. So please stay tuned. Thank you.
And with that, we'll turn it back to Ed.
Okay,
Thanks, everybody.
great. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. As you can see by that presentation, there's such deep history in the Bronx going back on, this has been going on for decades, trying to get these greenways activated and created. So, a round of applause to everyone who's been working on these issues for the last 30 years.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. So before we go on to the next presentation, I just want to acknowledge Council Member Rafael Salamanca, who's joining us here today. Shameless plug, and my council member too. So the next presentation is iNaturalist, Connect with Nature, and it's being presented by Carl Vetter, the Outreach Coordinator for Partnership for Parks.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for having me. We are here to talk about iNaturalist and how to connect with nature. If anyone here has the iNaturalist app on their phone, raise their hand. You are all the trendsetters in this room. Raise your hand if you think you can identify the insect in this picture. Okay, we have a few hands. Now, maybe more loosely, do you think we all know that this is a ladybug? Yes? No.
No.
It's not, and we're going to learn why. Oh, too soon. All right, so sadly in New York, in more urban areas, people will suffer from things called nature or plant blindness, where we will see nature and just see green, that all trees are the same, all lawns are the same. This can sometimes happen because sometimes you'll see a street that has the same tree planted the whole way, and they'll blend together. And other times you'll see a street with all different trees, and you won't even know how to tell one apart. But if you stop to take a look, you can see that there are differences. And you don't need to know what all those differences are, because iNaturalist will handle the rest. All right, so who's that lady? Nature often has two names, scientific and common. Common names have a history both that goes through time as well as geography. And so if anyone knows, ladybugs are not all ladies. Pronouns are a thing right now. Ladybugs are both gendered. There are also beetles. Bugs, stay the same their whole lives, while beetles go through that transformation. But not all ladybugs are called ladybugs, and some ladybugs are beetles. So then why are we using these names? Well, hundreds of years ago, back in ancient Europe, farmers would pray to the Virgin Mary to deliver the insects that would eat the aphids from their crops. Then they called it, Our Lady of Beetle, which shortened to Lady Beetle. And so I'm sure some of us have also thought the number of spots will tell us who we're looking at. That's not the case. Some will be named by their spots, but really, if you're looking at this picture, all these ladybugs have different faces. Some look like they have H's, some an M, and some look like it has eyes looking at you. And you don't need to know what these differences are, but if you stop to look and take a picture, the artificial intelligence will pick it up for you. So then who are we looking at? So we have the seven-spotted lady beetle, which when I mentioned the ancient Europe praying to the Virgin Mary, the 7 spots were references to her 7 sorrows. They were brought over as an IPM, integrated pest management system, for pest control, thinking this would solve our problems. That often is never the case. Then we have the Halloween beetle, which is the subject of contention on this page because sometimes it's referred to as the Asian lady beetle. And for some reason, this ladybug gets the nastiest heat, because why are some of them called bugs and why is this one called a beetle? I mentioned the years that they were brought over because some of these bugs haven't been around. Maybe 60 years ago, you wouldn't have seen a 7-spotted beetle. You wouldn't have seen the Halloween beetle, which was named because it has the most diversity in its appearances. It may have 2 spots, it may have 16. But that face, that that M on its face is how you identify it. I'm not here to tell you which ladybugs to like or which ones to hate. There's only truth in knowledge. Using iNaturalist gives you that truth to know that where is this ladybug from? The 9-spotted lady beetle was the state insect, and now, like all New Yorkers, sometimes we feel like we're being pushed out of our neighborhoods because of people who just came in. There's a story here. I'm not trying to tell you what that story is, but it's your story, and you can't complete your story unless you know more yourself. So you're not a scientist. We're all just regular people. iNaturalist. With iNaturalist, you will carry a team of biologists in your pocket. You'll learn about the wildlife in your neighborhood. You may have walked past a tree your whole life and never known what it was. I didn't know the trees in my own property or yard until I was 25. That's a long time to be around trees and not knowing what they were. And with iNaturalist, most importantly, you document your story. You keep track of your observations. You see what you're engaging. For example, outside my office at Renaqua, I saw large flower pink sorrel. I had never seen this before. I'm constantly pulling out yellow oxalis, which is a common invasive weed if you're a gardener. So I was like, ooh, what's this? Is this good? Because there are some oxalises sold as decorative plants. So just connecting that these dots, that these different species have different roles. But was it violet oxalis? I didn't know. I had to actually look at the roots to see if this was, in fact, the invasive species that shouldn't have been there. I leave it there because it's nice and pretty. I'm not here to tell you what plants to leave in your garden. So with using iNaturalist, today, later this afternoon, we have a lovely workshop that will teach you how to use the app, but also how to apply the app. Because it's not just enough to know what you're looking at, but how can you use this information to build your communities? We interact with our parks all the time. We could be doing tree ID. We could do nature walks. So if you come to our workshop later, we'll learn more. This is a map of the Bronx as we know it. All these greenways, paths, blue spaces, buildings, it looks very disconnected. But one of our goals is to connect it. And if you're wildlife, like a bird, an insect, a rabbit, a hawk, they don't see this. They might see this. This is our borough. Look at all these are individual contributions from people like you that thinks, I can help contribute to citizen science or community science. When we each post something, we learn more for ourselves, but now if someone comes by and walks where I walk on the greenway, they'll know that this was here, or that was here. But more importantly, nature is changing. The species I mentioned earlier that have only been here for like 25 years, there are complex relationships happening that we can't quite understand. But if we connect the dots, maybe someone else can. And that's what we're doing this for, because this data goes to decision makers, conservationists, people who know more about this than we do, people who are committed, who have the capacity. But you are the eyes and ears on the ground. Volunteerism can come in many forms, and sometimes we think, oh, it's only cleanups, or I have to know what weeds I'm pulling. But we all take photos, we all love Instagram. It doesn't hurt to take a picture of something that you think, oh, this is cool, and put it on an app. It does not take too much time, and it will open a doorway to a whole new world, because there are invisible barriers, but you know who doesn't see them? The wildlife. Connecting with nature opens exciting new possibilities, whether it's doing a community planting with us at Partnerships for Parks, creating fun activities to do with children or school groups, or even taking broad leaves out of intersectional approaches like cyanotype moth prints. This is when you use blueprint-style architecture techniques that aren't used anymore with iNaturalist and mothing, so that when we capture the moths on a sheet, they are imprinted onto a poster and then identified so that you know which moths you're looking at. I think that's a fantastic application of, okay, how do I use this knowledge about I love moths, how do I do something with it, how do I make it tangible? iNaturalist is the handy dandy little tool in your app to make it tangible. So I don't know what everyone's waiting for. I hope everyone after this presentation, at the very least, Download iNaturalist. It's also a website. It's very accessible. You get as much as you give into it. I am an outreach coordinator for Partnerships for Parks. There are 2 others of us, but we are here to help activate your parks and in as many interesting ways as possible. One of the hopes for the workshop is that we will get grand ideas from you all about how you can activate your parks using knowledge, because knowledge is what makes it less scary. And parks don't need to be any scarier. They need to be more understood. So thank you all for your time. We have a great day lined up.
Thank you so much, Carl Vetter. And yeah, definitely download iNaturalist. It's like Pokemon Go, but for nature, literally. Like, once you start playing with it, you don't want to put it down. Every plant that you walk by, every bug that you walk by, you want to identify. It's really cool. Okay, so we're going to move on to our panel discussion. Before we do that, I just wanted also to mention, I was mentioning earlier about how so many things happen from the grassroots level, and we can't discuss that without mentioning all the work that Nilka Martell from Loving the Bronx has done to bring the effort to cap the Cross Bronx and create more green spaces. So just wanted to acknowledge Nilka Martell for all the hard work that she's done and bringing it not just to the local and state level, but this is a national and international topic now. So our panel discussion is going to be led by Robert Fernuzzi. He is the president for the Bronx Council for Environmental Quality, which you've heard that name quite a bit today. And the presentation is called, the panel discussion is New Pathway for Bronx Greenways. You'll see a lot of maps throughout the cafeteria and also around the back, so you might want to pay attention to that later because they're going to be talking about a lot of these things here.
Well, thanks, Ed. We're about to start. We're just looking for one more panelist. Is Joyce? Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Okay. Everybody, this is a great day, and it's a great day to celebrate 30 years of a Greenway plan. It is an anniversary to really take pride in because this Greenway plan is the reason literally we are all here. Dart did just a fantastic job of telling us what birthed this Greenway plan, but guess what? The Greenway plan birthed Speak Up and the Bronx Toward the Bronx and everything that connects us. We would not be the Bronx without our fantastic network of green spaces and greenways that connect our communities but also connect our parks. And we are really so happy that DPR and the coalition and DOT are here because this is the defining aspect of our borough, a borough with an emerald necklace of beautiful parks connected by greenways. If there's one thing we all need and we all want, it's access to our parks. Greenways get us there. So thanks for everybody who's done this work. And I just wanted to introduce our plan to you today. And I hope this works. Yes, excellent. So I wanted to introduce our panelists. These are fantastic advocates and change makers in the borough. They are here because their time away from family, jobs, friends has made a difference in our city. So let's hear it from Mundo Martinez. You may not know Brian Hedden. Brian Hedden is going to be a very important person for you to know today. Let's hear it for Brian Hedden and all he's done for the Brooklyn Greenways. Really sad news. Joyce Hoagie, longtime BCQ board member, is under the weather, and she is here we will cover for Joyce as we all cover for each other, but we're really sorry she couldn't be here. Let's hear it for Christina Taylor. As you read on the back of your program, BCQ board member and VCPA deputy director, and a just lover of all things daylighting. And lastly, Sean C. Young, who needs no introduction, also Harlem River Working Group and BCQ. This is going to be a little wild meeting because we are actually going to try to make audience participation happen, right? So we're going to try to have a panel discussion. We are really going to treat it as a conversation starter, though, because we really believe that this current crop of greenways, which is 30 years plus, okay, 31 years officially starts today, that we believe these are the best years for greenways right in front of us. So we want you to really connect and engage and stay connected with this panel for the rest of the day. So we're going to give you a little fun ways to contribute right now and be talking about where your greenway is, what you want from greenways, what you hope greenways can become for you and your community. So we're going to have an opportunity for you to take some survey questions. And please, if you haven't seen our lovely maps, please situate yourself, connect yourself to these maps throughout the rest of the day. They're in this room, they're on the borders of this room, they're in the other room as well. These are original maps from the 2008 plan that Dart was chair of, and we really would love to hear from you about which is your greenway and all the things you hope that your greenway can be. Our advocates are going to speak about what's happening in their greenway and the good work that they've done to bring this greenway vision closer to reality. And then everyone here will have the chance to have a big last question together, which is, what is your priority for a greenway? What do you want from a greenway? Big question. You're going to have a chance to answer that, and all our panelists will too. Then we're all going to scatter. 2:30 we're going to go and we're going to have networking. Okay? But we want you to have time to continue thinking about greenways, more surveys. We're going to come back at 4 o'clock. Daniel and I are going to be right here, and we're going to tell you the results of our first ever live Speak Up survey about your visions, hopes, needs, problems, ideas for greenways. You're going to get that, so you got to stay around till 4 o'clock. Don't leave after this panel. Okay, you're going to get the results when we all come back together. So your first job right now, everybody, we got a little activity for you. Which Bronx Greenway are you? So there are 11 Greenway maps plus one master, and you should be able to pick up that QR code. Our assistants here, give them a hand, Giovanni and Mia. Yay! Also gave you printouts with a QR code, so take a second and hope that works. And everybody, just so you know, we're actually doing well on time.
Yep.
Yeah. You're going to have 15 minutes as a group. Yeah.
I thought Johnson was going to have 15 minutes by himself.
I have a question. So Bronx River, obviously my greenway, but it's not on the list. Should I just put it in as other?
It should be.
One do the survey.
Is that on it? We'll amend. We could amend.
Change it, fix it live.
Daniel? Okay.
If you check other, you can type something in.
Thank you, Danny. Daniel.
Got some feedback, sir.
All right. So everyone now, Daniel, do you want to tell us, toggle over to our results?
Has everybody put it in already?
Oh, we want to get the results before we go.
Yeah.
Let's find out.
It's like American Idol. Totally. Maybe we should get the results afterwards.
Okay. There's.
Why you want to switch?
Oh,
You want
we
to
can put
sway
this
the
online.
conversation
Sorry.
there, Chauncey?
After the commercial break.
I just think it's time. Yeah, make it keep it.
Okay. All righty. So this is our instant polling of who's in the house. A lot of Marshall LaPorte for you folks. All righty. So Dan, get us back to the
More than
screen.
one Bronx River. I'm with you, Maggie. We got a few Bronx Rivers.
Well, we'll redo that, and there's a chance, I'll tell you later, we will make that fix.
Thank you.
All righty. So thank you, everybody, and we'll have an ending question for you. That's number 2. And where were we? I told you this was going to be a little creaky. So we got our first question for our advocates to talk about. First of all, tell us a little bit about your greenway. What greenway do you advocate for? And what is the good news that we all need to hear? And I'm going to ask Christina to go first and tell a little bit about the Putnam Greenway.
All right, so this is the Putnam Greenway. It is in Van Cortlandt Park, the third largest park in New York City, the second largest park in the Bronx, and also known as the best park in New York City. Little biased, but. So the Putnam is the yellow trail that's in the middle of the map. It starts right now at the southern end of the Mill Pond, and you can actually go all the way north and go into Westchester County, where it's part of the Empire State Trail, and it goes all the way up to Putnam. And if you stay on the Empire State Trail, you can go all the way to Canada if you would like, and have the energy. So the good news about our trail, besides being in the best park, is that it's a relatively new greenway. It just opened in 2020, and we already have plans in the works to extend it. So it's going to go south now down to 30th Street. So recently the city announced that they acquired the CSX property from 240th to 230th. Woo! So we are going to be able to not only extend the greenway, which is amazing and awesome, but we're also going to daylight Tibbetts Brook, which is a very amazing feat. So it's going to be the largest green infrastructure project New York City has ever done. So in a few years, we'll use the word few loosely. In a few years, we will be able to ride your bike, go for a walk from Van Cortlandt Park all the way down to 230th next to a beautiful daylit Tibbetts Brook. And in addition to that happening, it'll break ground in a couple of years. Once that's done, it'll also, which is wonderful, improve the access to Van Cortlandt Park, because now if you live in the Kingsbridge community, especially if you're like right around, I'm completely blanking, like Bailey and all of those down there, it's really hard to get into the park safely because Van Cortlandt Park South has a lot of traffic. So now, once it's done, you'll be able to walk along the greenway safely to get into the park. So that's exciting.
Great. Thank you, Christina. Next up, Sean C. Young, tell us about the Harlem River Greenway.
Sure. So we saw when Dart was sharing earlier the maps of the Bronx Greenway Plan. The reason for the Greenway Plan was to connect communities to our existing parks, right? Creating that network. So the Harlem River Greenway has been a part of that visioning since the very beginning, connecting communities from the South Bronx, where there's less parks, to the North Bronx, that beautiful park in Van Cortlandt, and hopefully these networks to also connect us to the Pelham Park and our beautiful Orchard Beach. So all these networks are so important. So the Harlem River Greenway, we've been advocating for this for decades. The Harlem River Working Group has been in existence since 2009. But again, those roots go back to BCQ and the early Greenway plans. So I think it's important to acknowledge when we're thinking about this is that soon it will be one of our youth who are here doing our timers that are going to be up sitting in our space, because parks and Greenway advocacy takes decades sometimes. So the vision right now is to develop that greenway from Randall's Island all the way up to Van Cortlandt Park, connecting to the Putnam line, and ideally making a connection also to the Hudson River, Greenway. So we are really looking at connecting our communities together, connect communities that have been disconnected since the time of Robert Moses from the Cross Bronx and the Deegan Expressway, where communities had that connections prior to, and we're looking to work on that again. The wonderful news that we have, we conclude the Putnam Greenway and the daylighting as part of that wonderful news, because that network is so important, but we also were able to get the RAISE grant funding that Brian's going to talk about shortly, because we're all part of the New York City Greenway Coalition here too. But it's the key piece that we have is that, as Margot shared, we were able to advocate that for this new greenway planning that's starting citywide. The first greenway that DOT is committed to the planning processes is here in the Bronx for the Harlem River Greenway. So we're expecting in the spring. We were hoping to be able to make the announcement today, but the idea is you should go to our table and sign up so you get that information. But we will be starting in the spring visioning sessions with the DOT to do the next stages of planning for the Harlem River Greenway that we can actually connect onto the waterfront.
Thank you, John C. Let's hear it for Harlem River Greenway. So I'm very sorry our BCQ colleague Joyce Hoagie could not be here today. This is the latest, I believe, in the DOT presentation of the Grand Concourse Greenway. We don't have a representative here to speak about. I really hope that people from the community here can fill in. If you do know anything about it, we're going to have a networking opportunity afterwards. But I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize a person who's really working hard for the Hudson River Greenway on behalf of the Friends of Hudson River Greenway. That's Bob Bender. So if anyone would like to know the latest on that, he, I think, will be in the networking session. So I'm going to just go on to now. Mundo, could you tell us about Bronx River Greenway?
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, my name is Edmundo. So I advocate, one of the greenways I advocate for is the Bronx River Greenway. It is a multi-use path that runs along the only freshwater river in New York City. I like to kind of highlight that always. It's some of the good news about it. It's 19 of the 23 miles are completed, which is great. Yeah, definitely clap for that. It's work that I like to always say that I'm just like the current person kind of leading some of the charge. This is work that, like Chauncey mentioned, has been part of decades-long efforts by community members, activists, and organizations. Some other good news about the Greenway, Starlight, the current phases of Starlight are like as close to opening as possible, which means way more access for community members to being able to access Starlight Park instead of folks like myself having to walk 3/4 of a mile to enter Starlight. I can walk literally like 0.2 or 0.1 and be able to access the Starlight Park. Also further south, Garrison Park has opened up. It's a way to connect Concrete Plant Park to the Hunts Point side of the Greenway.
Wow.
And that connection, one of the beautiful parts about that connection is it goes under the Bruckner Expressway. So it means people, young children, families do not have to cross that torrential, horrible intersection that is the Cross Bronx, the Bruckner and Hunts Point Avenue. There is now a car-free, easily accessible way to access Hunts Point. Which also means that our Hunts Point neighbors can now make their way north without having to go through those same treacherous intersections. There's still a lot more work to be done. We'll touch on that more. But yeah, and it's great to see there's a lot more activations happening up and down the river. There's libraries being installed, bike stands. Community partners have been coming out and getting more involved. So there's a lot of beautiful things happening up and down the Greenway. And yeah, we'll talk about more on that in a minute.
Excellent. Thank you, Mundo. Excellent, excellent. Okay. Now I'd like to have Brian wind up because Brian does double duty. He's a Brooklyn Greenway advocate, but he's also part of the New York City Greenway Coalition. Part of why we're so happy Brian's here is because he can give us the citywide picture of what's happening in all the boroughs. So I know you can't cover all 4 boroughs in a couple of minutes, but tell us what's happening that's new, Brian.
Yeah, well, I think there have been, over the past couple of years, there have been some really positive forward developments in terms of lifting the greenways across the city, and I'd say the 2 parallel efforts were getting the citywide greenway plan legislation passed to the city council, so that there's a mandate essentially to get essentially like a catalog, a plan of what greenways are out there, what state they're in, and where there need to be additional greenways built out. And it would be essentially an important update to what happened in 1993 during the Dinkins administration. You can kind of see the coalition put these 2 maps together as just sort of trying to visualize what was going on. If you look at the map on the left, that is one possible view of a fully completed citywide citywide greenway network. And the map on the right shows that there's a lot of, yellows and a lot of reds on that map that indicate where greenways might not be in, terribly good condition. They might be a little bit too narrow for the types of use they're seeing, or they might not be built out at all. So getting the city government to tackle a plan like this, where they're reaching out to multiple stakeholders across all of the communities to be able to build out a plan like this is an important one. And then the other parallel effort was, as Chauncey had mentioned, there was an application by the city DOT to the federal government for some planning funds to essentially get a kickstart on getting a number of new corridors built out citywide. Now, maybe the unfortunate thing is that the planning funds only go a certain distance. There's always going to be, more greenways that across the city that people are going to want to see built out. But the ones that we're expecting to see out of this current RAISE application would definitely get a kickstart to getting us a lot closer to what we see on the map on the left.
Great, thank you. So, Brian, just because I want you to hold on to the mic and we can save time, you're going to get the next question, just to let you know. But here's our question, everybody. So one of the great things about greenways is that they help everybody and they connect everybody. But because this is the city of New York, that also means that there are many agencies and many organizations and many private property concerns that get in the way of a unified greenway plan. There's a reason why it takes 30 years to get us to where we are today. So Greenway, because they have so many benefits, they also have so many stakeholders and so many potentials for moving parts that don't move together very well. So, Brian, I just wanted you to talk about what has been one of the biggest challenges. You could talk about Brooklyn, your experience, or about what you see happening now. What are some of the biggest challenges that Greenway completion really bring you right now?
I mean, it definitely, I'd say the first thing just starts with how much time it takes to get from the start to the end. Even getting from the beginning of the planning process can take quite a bit of an effort. Just thinking back to the Brooklyn waterfront greenway, the northern part, there was a lot of effort from just say grassroots volunteers, organizations, meeting with their council members, different elected officials, different people in government, just to try to get the support from the administration, and it was the Bloomberg administration at the time, for putting together a plan for getting that greenway built out. And that was, they finally did that in 2012, and they came up with what they term as an implementation plan that really identified essentially all of the rights of way issues. It identified all of the capital projects and the probable lead agencies on all of those projects in order to get, say, the first 14 miles built out for the northern section of the greenway. That was 2012, and on one hand, I'm very happy with the amount of progress that's taken place, because just a lot of the greenway segments that didn't exist in 2012 have been built out. They've been, there's some decent, some maybe sidewalk bike connectors. There's other areas that have really proper, trails and off-street walking and biking facilities with some decent landscaping to boot. But that's 11 years ago, and there's still some significant gaps in that. There's still progress being made, and that's, again, once a plan like that exists, it's fantastic that there's always maybe a little bit of forward progress each year to get the whole, getting closer to getting the whole thing done, but 11 years on, it's still not done. So the lead time on stuff like this is really pretty dramatic.
Yeah. Mundo, you want to take things?
I'd say one of the biggest challenges that I know I have personally faced with doing this work, and I see in doing this work, is finding the community members who have the capacity to support and help this kind of work, and then supporting them while they're doing it. Asking folks to volunteer their time, volunteer their efforts or money. It's a big ask, and then asking them to do that while they're taking care of family or friends or elders or just trying to survive in the world that we're currently living in is difficult. Burnout, stress, and then stating all the stuff that Brian just mentioned. It's hard to give people wins, and wins is kind of what keeps people going. So, you know, when you're advocating for something and you're like, hey, we've been doing this for a decade and I'm 3 years in volunteering and I haven't gotten something to be excited about, it gets tough. It gets tough on people. And I think that correlates to the next one would be getting through the bureaucratic red tape of government. Trying to get community members to get excited and involved, and then trying to explain a system that doesn't make sense kind of doesn't work. You know, so then it's like, what do you mean? Like, they know this, they say they want to do this, and I'll just highlight like the Tremont, East 172nd DeVoe, that's been an intersection for well over a decade that's been getting highlighted, it's gotten partially funded, and it just keeps getting delayed, and it's hard to express to community members to stay involved and stay active without the progress that they see. And then it usually correlates back to the, no one cares, or the system doesn't care. So that to me has always been the hardest part. How do you get people to care, get them involved, and then keep them going once they are tapped in?
Yeah, thanks, Wendell. That's great.
So when I thought about this question when you asked it, I thought challenges once the Greenway is open, not challenges for advocating for it. So I have a little bit of a different answer, which may be good though, because it's still, once you build the Greenway, there can be challenges. So a challenge that we have noticed, and I've noticed throughout the Bronx actually, is over the last few years, there's more motorized scooters, there's more e-bikes, there's more dirt bikes. And ever since they popped up even more throughout the Bronx, we're now finding them on our Greenway more and more. And it's, you know, becomes an unsafe condition. And there's also the increased use of Grubhub and Uber Eats. I'm guilty of ordering at least once a week, and I know those drivers cut through the park and it drives me crazy. So that is a challenge. Like, how do we keep these motorized vehicles off of our greenways? And I'm going to sound like a broken record because I'm pretty sure I've said this at every single speak up, but I'm going to say it one more time. New York City Parks is underfunded. They do not have enough funding to hire enough PEP officers to keep these greenways safe. So we need more PEP officers to be able to patrol our parks and keep them safe and keep people using them the correct ways. And we also need more funding for maintenance in order to maintain these beautiful new greenways that we're building.
That's great, yeah.
I would sort of build off of that in the sense, I would say equity is the main issue. You know, in any issue in the Bronx, equity is the issue. You know, my day work is as an education organizer, working in our schools and looking at equity. I'm a volunteer doing this parks work. I put a lot of hours into it, as Mundo does. But like, you know, equity in the terms of parks and commitments from the city to develop parks equitably and maintain those parks equitably in the city is such a challenge. And that is, you know, we see it time and time again, you know, when Mayor de Blasio made the commitment, $800 million to complete the Greenway around the borough of Manhattan, at the same time that, you know, one of our waterfront parks on the Harlem River was given over to a private developer to build housing. So there was parks and green space for Manhattan, but for the Bronx, it was, you know, giving parks to developers. So I think there's a real push, you know, and we as Bronx residents can need to continue to push for equity. And I think the fact that DOT has made their first project, the Harlem River Greenway, is an acknowledgement of that loss of equity for years and that loss of equitable development of greenways. But I think we all need to push as park advocates, as Christina said. It's one thing is building these projects, but then it's maintaining it. You know, Bridge Park South, one of my favorite parks, I'm there every morning walking my dog at 4 or 5 in the morning. It's about getting the staffing to maintain these greenway spaces. And we can have volunteer groups do this, but if the Parks Department itself doesn't have staff to maintain it, then we struggle to keep our parks beautiful, safe, and where people feel like they can use them. So I think, you know, we don't have a Central Parks, you know, foundation. We don't have a Riverside Park Foundation that is bringing in private funds to support parks to do this. So I think one is we need the city to invest in developing parks, but we also need a way to figure out how the city can support parks more in maintaining these spaces that we develop. And not just depending on volunteer labor. We're all happy to do parks cleanup events and things like that, but we need more staffing for parks to do that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So I'm just going to throw a follow-up question to everybody because you raised a couple of great points. And one of them is that there were park spaces that did not become parks. Okay, there were park spaces that became housing developments. And a lot of times in greenway planning, you run into issues where something's part of the plan and then it's not. And we've all faced things like that. There's also debates about how we work with private property and the 30-foot open space requirements that they bring along waterfront and for greenways. What part does parks play? And as we were putting this together, we really realized that parks is really dependent on these other entities and agencies to make sure that the greenways that bring people to parks actually are completed. So I wanted to just have your, Chauncey, you made me think about that. And Mundo, I also wanted to ask you, and anyone else, when did you first feel that city agencies or decision makers got it, what you were trying to do? Because I really feel for a long time, greenways and the benefits they brought were kind of off the city agenda, so to speak. And now we really feel that city is trying to work as much with advocates as possible. So I want to throw, you can take either of those questions about how you deal with non-park stakeholders in greenways, Chauncey, and then anyone else talking about when you feel, what made city agency actually feel like this was part of the city's business.
So, I think it is a real issue when you're trying to develop property, you're trying to make a linear green space for a community, that you're going to find different stakeholders. And unfortunately, along the waterfront and in our many other locations, city property has been given away to agencies, whether it's MTA, whether it's DOT, whether it's Con Edison, different organizations have stake in the land that we're doing. And I think it's sometimes a push to really make sure that all parties involved understand that communities' access to the waterfront should be a prominent and a priority over all things. This is a waterfront city. It's a metropolitan waterfront city. It's one of the largest, maritime cities in the U.S. But so many of our communities have been cut off from that waterfront. Where the Harlem River, for example, had 50 boathouses and people recreated along the Harlem River, for decades. That is no longer seen as the case. So I think we need to really be able to push agencies like the MTA that is blocking Tibbetts Brook and the Putnam line from connecting to the Harlem River, MTA for the property south of the High Bridge that is keeping us from connecting it, and really just having all agencies realize that communities' access should be more important than one single issue that they're doing for holding land. Really, that's a lot of these agencies are doing, is holding land for some future idea, but that comes at the stake of community access.
Yeah, anybody else? Yeah, Christine.
I'll speak to the aspect of when did I get it. I'll be honest and say that sometimes I think I still don't think they've gotten it. But I will say there's been a lot of progress. I first got introduced to advocacy work in about 2012, 2013. And I was just talking to someone today about this, someone who I met through advocacy, who I consider a friend to this day. It's a way different world now. There's a lot more stuff happening. There's a lot more progress. Yet it seems like we're still so far away. But with that said, I think I've seen in the last few years some really dope individuals in some really powerful positions who I feel in one-on-one conversations get it. and they're doing what they can within their respective agencies and position to support the people on the ground, to get the resources to the people who live in the areas and know exactly what's needed. Oftentimes, city and state agencies state, hey, we want a park, and then the city goes, well, we built you one, but it was with no input, it was with no type of people on the ground. So I think it has gotten better within the last few years. I will admit that the COVID pandemic allowed for these agencies and organizations to operate in a way that they said they never could before. Yeah. The virtual meetings, the having stuff on video, allowing people to be where they at while providing input without having to pull them into a random meeting on a random weeknight at a random time, and then their voice doesn't get heard, and then the city agencies get to say, well, no one told us. So I will say that within the last few years, I do feel that there is some progress. There are people who are getting it. I think it's important that some of these people that are in these positions are cyclists, are parents, are lifelong New Yorkers, are park goers, are people who understand that it's more than just building a park or a greenway or a green space, but it's also empowering the community that lives there and ensuring that whatever you're creating isn't taken away, but supporting the culture that already exists.
I just realized one thing we've forgotten to mention today, and this is when we're talking about federal agencies, city agencies taking importance. So I want to acknowledge that both the Bronx River and the Harlem River are part of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. We were one of the first 7 rivers nationwide that were selected to be in collaboration with federal partners that are supposed to be working with city, state, and federal partners to connect community members to the waterfront. So just to acknowledge that, we have Rob and we have Christina here from the Hudson River Foundation, and in the visioning that's happening with the DOT this spring, the Hudson River Foundation, HEP, is going to be, supporting that with doing community visioning, and there are actually going to be some opportunities for community groups and park groups to get small grants potentially to do work along the Harlem River as part of that visioning. So I do want to acknowledge that, and that is from our federal partners from the EPA. So it's just important when we're talking about that. We do have the support from the federal government in doing this process, so I do want to acknowledge that. So thank you.
So what are the most important things about greenway planning, I think that, Edmundo, you brought up, is that it cannot be set aside as a kind of jewel and just left alone. And an amenity. It is not an amenity. It is a fabric of urban life, okay, that really engages community in a really productive way. And that is happening and that is changing, unfortunately, because we were locked down with more opportunity. There have also been how many plans created by universities, well-meaning universities, advocacy groups for these greenway plans. At this point, right, we really feel we cannot be put in another visioning session that does not have capital attached to it. Yeah, and I think that is changing. One thing, as an advocate myself on behalf of the Putnam Greenway, is this issue of a jurisdiction outside even city agencies and state agencies having the name of MTA. I've had a special request from my colleague Karen Argenti to talk about some of the issues involving the Putnam Greenway. Where do we go from 230th Street? Its current termination is 230th. Right now, we need to build another pathway southwards to get to the Harlem River so that we connect with Roberto Clemente, Bridge Park North, South, et cetera. So that's a big issue. Karen, you're going to need a mic, somebody, and you can't take this mic. You got to take that.
Yep. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think it's very good that we talk about the Parks Department, and I love the Parks Department. I think this is a problem for a policy in the city of New York. There are many, many benefits for having greenways and having parks that are connected, and I think people are forgetting that. And if we can't get that done, we're gonna lose space. Like we're losing where the Putnam Greenway stops at 230th Street and it doesn't go any further, we're losing that space because the MTA decided to go from Grand Central Station to Grand Central Terminal and bring in people from Long Island and use the space that they used to sort their garbage in, and they're going to use the area that we had planned for 30 years to be the path that goes from 230th to 225th Street. They're going to use it to sort garbage. No.
That is true.
And that's because we have no policy here. And so I think it's nice that I'm speaking up, okay? We need...
Karen, but we got a panel.
We need more. Okay, I said enough.
Keep going, Karen.
And it's important to acknowledge that MTA agreed to that, which is what Karen said. MTA agreed to that decades ago to give that property to parks.
Yeah.
And now they're saying Manhattan's trash and Long Island's trash takes precedence over Bronx residents' access to a greenway. So this is where we need you to push back as Bronx residents, saying that trash shouldn't take precedence over people. Trash on the tracks, that's right. Community Board 7 and Community Board 8 should be outraged about that, but it's stopping all of us from the Harlem River connecting up to Van Cortlandt Park and making that greenway connection happen.
Thank you, Chauncey. And if you don't know, hold on. I just wanted to acknowledge, if you don't know, Karen Argenti, and that she is a board member of Bronx Council of Environmental Quality, in case you don't know. Okay. So this is fantastic discussion. It's doing everything we hope. We want to say what's now potentially in the pipeline. Okay, that could change things. So what are the resources that are now in the pipeline, that are available, that could change your work, and that could bring resources to Bronx greenways? We had a couple of notions or mentions before of big projects happening. So if you have one, federal, state, does anybody want to make there's infrastructure funding from the federal government. There's raised grant funding. Brian may be the one to do this. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, one of the problems I have in answering this question is that I still don't feel like that there's this, this pot of money that's been unleashed for greenways specifically. There's still an awful lot of having to apply for, one particular funding stream, another funding stream. The raised grant, I think, is an example of that. A fair amount of cash and planning funds for the city through an existing federal program that's existed in some form for about 15, 20 years that is, it's definitely not, greenway specific, park specific, anything like that. I mean, it's not parks specific at all. It's out of the U.S. Department of Transportation. There was some additional greenway construction money that was made available in the last city budget that typically has not materialized in the past. But I would say that it was, I'd like to give credit to the Adams administration for prioritizing this, but it was also partially funding two projects that were essentially underway for relatively well-established greenways in Brooklyn and Queens. And I kind of get the feeling that it's sort of left the remaining funds for those projects to come out of sort of the same process where individual council members are negotiating with each other. So it's good to see that there's some more executive support for these projects, and I would hope to see that continue in this year's coming budget and for the remaining budgets in the Adams administration and beyond. But there's still not that sort of firm commitment that we're going to do this on a year-in, year-out basis. And then I'd say, particularly on the state level, there was the Environmental Bond Act that was passed by referendum this last time around. Again, there was nothing that was really greenway specific in those funds, but there's opportunities for municipal governments and agencies to apply for funding for greenway projects out of that Bond Act. And there's something about the Bond Act that helps out the city a little bit better from the standpoint that there are rules, there are there are essentially guidelines that are written into the bill that should make a lot more of that state money available to communities within the 5 boroughs of New York, whereas the standing programs that are part of the state appropriation budget tend to favor upstate communities much more heavily over the 5 boroughs in Long Island. So hopefully, the Bond Act releases some of that funding into the city, and also encourages those agencies to kind of open up state appropriations for the city as well. But there are opportunities, but it's like taking the water spigot and turning it a little bit, and the hope is that just encourages people to keep turning it and keep going with it.
So Brian, 2 things. One is that everybody should know that we voted for an Environmental Bond Act. And the way that we're going to get those environmental funds is not quite clear yet. BCQ was part of a consultation with the advocates for that, in which it's really larger nonprofits that will be the anchors of that, and we're not sure how it's going to quote-unquote trickle down, as they used to say, to smaller organizations, which predominate in the Bronx. That's a huge issue. Brian, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the model of Destination Greenway. I bring that up because we thought this was our shot to get the Harlem River Greenway put into Destination Greenway funding, and it did not make the cut. This was an interesting model. It's being used in Queens. I believe it was connecting Brooklyn and Queens, correct? Was that the project?
There were 2 separate projects. There was one in Eastern Queens and one in Southwest Brooklyn. So they didn't connect with each other. They were
okay. Yeah, I got the boroughs right. So could you tell us a little bit about that model as it's unfolding, Destination Greenway?
Yeah, and I guess I'll start off by saying that I think that the Destination Greenways project, as it's unfolded, has really been. It seems like it will take corridors where there's already significant greenways in existence, and there might be a few gaps here or there, and it's looking to connect those greenways with a cohesive corridor and to connect different parks destinations to one another. I would say it's the way the program's unfolded, it's not well equipped to solve a lot of the right-of-way questions that might exist in other areas in the city. So like along the Harlem River, it probably was never going to be able to do that, because it's not even doing that for the parts in Brooklyn and Queens that it's in. I would say that for Southwest Brooklyn, this was something that, before I joined Brooklyn Greenway Initiative, I was part of a Southern Brooklyn bike group, one of the co-founders of that group. We found Destination Greenways entirely underwhelming, because we felt as though that the key problems to address were the gap area that goes through Coney Island and Brighton Beach and Sheepshead Bay, where there's essentially no greenway. We thought that was the critical gap to address, and Destination Greenways was really looking at upgrading an existing greenway that was along the Belt Parkway, and maybe doing a little bit of connection to Coney Island.
Excellent.
Yeah, I can say something about it a little bit. Yeah, I just want to highlight real quick. The Bronx got left out of Destination Greenways altogether.
Yeah,
so that's one of the things that Chauncey mentioned when it comes to equity. You see these citywide projects that are happening, and then you don't see the Bronx included in the citywide project.
Yeah.
Right. And that was, I think, part of the DOT selection of the Harlem River was because the Harlem River was in Destination Greenways, and Parks and DOT at that time decided it was too complicated to include it. So that's when they left out the Bronx and went to Queens and Brooklyn, communities that have a lot more greenways than the borough of the Bronx. So, I think the piece of that I think is the positive thing that came out of Destination Greenways, and what we're looking for this DOT plan is many times when there's projects, the city will say, we can give money to shovel-ready projects. And that means that there's been a study and there's been a cost analysis of how much it will cost to develop this stretch of land into parkland, into greenways. And it's very different for folks, and I think as all of us as park advocates in this room, you know, it's a different place than other parts of the state. My dad helps maintain 60 miles of rail to trail and greenway paths in upstate New York. And, you know, if they put $5,000 in a project, they're building acres of pathway because it's all being done with volunteer labor. You know, when you're talking about a bathroom facility in a park in New York City, you're talking $2, $3, $4 million, depending on, you know, the cost. So like these issues are what we need to do. So the piece with Destination Greenway and with this DOT plan is we should end this with shovel-ready, costed out projects that then we can turn to our electeds and say, council member, we need you to fund this. Borough president, we need you to fund this. State senator, we need you to fund this. But unless there's a monetary value, how much it's going to cost that the city agrees with, and they don't agree, unfortunately, with what we think project is going to cost. So that's the advantage of this, and getting these plans put on paper, how much it will cost to do this, that we can then advocate for them happening. That's the next step to making these greenways a reality.
Great. Chauncey, it's funny you should mention an elected official. We just have a special guest. Is Assemblyman Dinowitz with us?
Take the children around.
Oh.
You want me to get him?
Yeah. I just thought, okay, we're going to get Assemblyman Dinowitz back. So what Chauncey mentioned planning, and since the Assemblyman was here, it was time to put him on the spot and ask him to support Empire State Trail designation of the Harlem River Greenway that will go from Van Cortlandt Park to 230th, continue through some magical carpet to 190th, and through 145th, through all our lovely city parks and our state park, the Jewel, and then down to Randall's Island. That is a New York State designation. We're after that. We need that. I know he will want it. But that's part of the protection and policy that's going to make, hopefully, greenway planning more holistic. So, until...
Hey, Robert, I just wanted to add something, to what, build on something that Chauncey was saying in terms of shovel-ready projects. In Brooklyn, on the waterfront greenway, there's essentially two different, guiding plans that shape what that looks like. There's the implementation plan that deals with the northern part, basically Greenpoint to Sunset Park, and then there's something that's called the Shore Parkway Greenway Master Plan that was done by the Department of City Planning back in 2004. That deals with the Bay Ridge to the East New York section, and the one for the southern one was much more conceptual, and as Chauncey, what you were saying, that one didn't really have anything that was costed out. It was really just, this is where maybe the rights of way would go, this is what it would look like, but it didn't really get into individual capital projects, costing things out. And I think the expectation is that with the raised funding that's coming up for these projects over the next couple of years, is that they're going to look a lot more like those implementation plans that have capital projects and costs attached to them. I think there would be a concern that if it looked like anything less than that, if it looked more like that Shore Parkway Master Plan, because that is a case of something that could just be, here's another plan, now it's going to sit on the shelf for another 15 years.
Thank you. I just brought up the Assemblyman. Assemblyman, do you want to greet us? Say hi. And 30 years of Greenway, please.
Yeah, you want me to greet you? Okay, greetings. So I'm actually here with my grandsons. My son couldn't be here today, and I've been coming to this, how many years, Karen? Every single year. And I just want to say thank you to everybody here, because one of the most important things we have in our Bronx are our parks and everything related to parks. And for those of us who've been fighting for our parks, fighting for the Jerome Park Reservoir, fighting for Van Cortlandt Park and all our others, I just want to say that I really appreciate it. You know, people from outside the Bronx don't really get it, that the Bronx has incredible resources. We are the borough of parks, after all. So everything we do to improve our parks, increase our parks, create greenways, really makes a difference in the lives of a lot of people. So, and by the way, like Karen, I graduated from this very institution, and I've lived here my entire life. So, and I will live here for my entire life. So anyway, thank you all for being here, and I really appreciate the work you do.
Okay, so everyone, we want to hear from you. Karen grabbed the mic, but please don't come up here and grab a mic. You don't need to grab the mic. You have that lovely QR code, and we want to take a little audience survey right now. Whoops, wrong direction. We don't want to, we know you have challenges. We can't hear all of it. We don't have a survey for it anyway. Here's our survey, everybody. What is your Greenway priority? And this is going to be our last question for the panel too, so just take a minute. And we actually are going to let this question go a little bit because our time management has been so superb. We're going to close out our panel discussion among our panelists with what you believe a Greenway really is. What are your Greenway priorities? But just think about this for a minute. This topic brings together, this challenge, this dream brings together bicyclists and birders and parkies. And who am I missing? Joggers and people who run concessions, people into economic development, transportation, urban planners. It's the one policy that connects us all. Yes, so, and then there's climate change advocates. So take a poll, and I'm going to ask you all a question about your priorities for building a greenway. But also, just as a follow-up, know that I want to take us there too. What does the next generation of greenways look like to you? More striping on the road or more green in the greenways? So think about that, finish your survey, and then let our panelists really talk about what they dream and want for a greenway, but also what they see as the next gen greenway 30 years in. So everyone take this, reaching okay? This is all going to important people, by the way, these surveys. I've already got, first of all, I'm going to give it to Iris and Jasenia, okay, and the commissioner, and also DOT. And this is the kind of voices from all sides that city agencies really need to hear in one room. All righty, so do we have any answers? And I think, Daniel, you were going to help me toggle?
Sure.
Okay.
Did anybody fill out the survey already?
Yeah, we're looking on the second survey question now. Everybody got this? So just...
I didn't see any phones go up.
Okay. They may have done it already. So we'll get at number 2.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, spitballing.
All right.
Go for it.
Oh, okay. So panelists, take a look at our responses here. Wow, there's a really range of responses here, and it's kind of like a definition in progress of what a greenway is. So what is our top vote getter over there? 61%.
Second name of traffic. That's beautiful.
Oh, this is... Does everyone know what a rain garden is? Something like, there you go, something that collects rain. Not every greenway is green, by the way. A greenway can be asphalt. Okay, so this is your priority.
So were these pick one or pick all? Pick any that
I think you can pick as many as apply. Yeah. Why don't you guys take it? What is your vision for? What is your priority? How would you answer this question?
I mean, I was going to play along with pick one, with the caveat that I really think that all of these kind of, you check off all of these boxes and you have a really outstanding open space and active transportation corridor. If I were going to pick only one, I would probably start with the separation from traffic, just because if it's something that is mixing in with traffic, that's something where there's already right off the bat, there's going to be a whole lot of people that are not going to want to do that. They're not going to feel comfortable. It's not going to be an inviting space. If you have something that's separated from traffic and then you don't check off any of those other boxes, that's sort of, just, it's a blah greenway. It works, but it could be so much better. There's definitely a lot of other things in terms of, I'd love to have the landscaping and the waterfront access and all those other things. But I guess, and especially when I'm using them, it's always, I'm trying to get somewhere. I'm trying to get to one of the parks. I'm trying to get to the waterfront. So obviously all these things are important, but I kind of think of that first building block as being just making sure that it's separated from traffic.
Excellent. Mundo, how do you answer that?
For me, a priority, and I didn't see all the responses, but when you asked me what would be the priority for the Greenway, for me is investing in and supporting the existing community that lives in that Greenway and in the surrounding areas. And how do we get the people who this Greenway should be benefiting to be a part of that whole process and see it as something that's intended for them and not part of development or gentrification or displacement. So to me, that's the priority. And then getting the resources to these spaces where it's like, once we have this, it is clean, it is nice, it is not, it's really difficult going to other spaces or other boroughs and seeing the stuff that they have. And then you come to your neighborhood park and you don't see those things. And you just ask yourself, what's the difference? What's the difference between us and them? And sometimes it is income, sometimes it is the demographic of people's backgrounds, but also times it's just the people here don't know or don't have the opportunity to do the things that are being provided as a staple. I just look at the Long Island City waterfront and how all that space got developed with private developers and city and combined. Like, they have beach chairs and you can't get a bench in some of our parks. Yep. They have an outdoor volleyball court in Long Island City with sand. And in the Bronx, we often get left out of the most minute things. It's so hard to get a bike rack sometimes.
Edmundo, I love that. Sand. They get sand.
They have a beach volleyball court with year-round outside with sand. They have hammocks along the waterfront in Long Island City. I urge everyone to go to Long Island City, Hunters Point, go there, see what is possible, and then demand the same from your elected officials here, because there is no reason they can't do that here. It's because they don't want to. And oftentimes when it does come, it comes with displacement. It comes with stuff that you don't feel is meant to be part of where... I'm 43, I lived here my whole life. And there's stuff that you see like, this doesn't feel like it's meant for me. And it's hard to get convinced otherwise. So that's, to me, is the priority. How do you make the people who live in the neighborhood where these greenways are going through feel like this is for them, and then support them and make it feel safe for them to continue and actually use this and provide them with the resources that they need to utilize the spaces that we're creating?
Okay. You just knocked it out. Thank you, Edmundo. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So I think a problem that we have with not every greenway that's built, but every single capital project that the city does, is that they don't tie any expense money to the project. So we build these new spaces. So we're about to have a mile extension of greenway with a beautiful daylit stream along it. And when that's built, are we going to get more park staff to maintain it? No. Are we going to get more funding for it? No. More vehicles? No. So Parks is always put in this position where you get something brand new and shiny, but they're not given the support they need to actually maintain it. So I think with the future, if every greenway had expense money tied to it for maintenance, for staff, for vehicles, for equipment, for more PEP officers, that's something that we definitely need. And then we also need to start looking at how we can better design them for entrances to keep these motorized vehicles off of them. And if I'm thinking, 30 years down the road, what would I like? I would love every greenway to have a beautiful daylit stream next to it. Let's do some more daylighting.
Building on what folks said, I think is equity. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge we have 4 folks in the back of the room. They're part of our new Bronx Bike Collective. They've been doing bike repairs out here in Lehman Park. And these are the type of resources we want to build. So if folks want to get connected with the Bronx Bike Collective, we want to have repairs and things like that. Connect with the folks in the back. They might have a table. And folks, Mundo and I are part of it also. But I just want to acknowledge that, like, you know, these are building and bringing resources into the Bronx. We're doing it ourselves with sweat equity, but I think it is about equity, right? Again, I always come back to this, like, what we have, as Mundo said, what we have in the Bronx, we shouldn't be fighting to get crumbs from the city, right? The Putnam Greenway only, and the daylighting of Tibbetts Brooks only makes sense if it connects to the Harlem River, so it's part of an integrated greenway network. You know, the city is committed to develop a greenway around the length of Manhattan, but we still haven't gotten the city to commit to developing a greenway along the border of the Bronx, right? I mean, every person, it's not just about my greenway, it's not just about Mundo's greenway, it's not just about the Hudson River Greenway, it's about creating a safe off-road greenway network throughout New York City that connects to regional greenways around the city so that, you know, you can do a ride like my daughter did, you know, riding from New York City to Niagara Falls. You know, most of that was off street once she got out of the city. The most dangerous part of the ride was her riding from our home in Highbridge to Van Cortlandt Park, right? Where we're riding on the streets of the Bronx. That was the most dangerous part of the ride, with her riding to Buffalo and Niagara Falls. The most dangerous part was in our own neighborhood, right? That's not right, right? We need to be fighting for a network so that people can take their children to school, so people can get to work, you know, safely off street. And it's not just in the Bronx. Like, I lost a good friend, Norm Fruchter, who was an education advocate for decades in Brooklyn this past year, you know, run over by a car in Christmas, you know, coming back from his park, just crossing the street. You know, we need to create safe spaces for all New Yorkers. This should be a reality. We want New York to be on the forefront, right? There's so many countries across, you know, the world, the Netherlands and Europe, that are creating safer spaces where 50, 60% of kids, or even 90% of kids, are biking to school or walking to school. And their health benefits, their health outcomes are so much better than our own, right? We always have to look back to not only about having safe streets, but also what having these safe corridors could do for our own health, right? The Bronx is not 62 counties out of 62 counties, the worst health disparities of any county in New York State. One of the worst health disparities in the country is because we don't have access to safe parks and green spaces. We do if you live near Van Cortlandt, we do if you live near Pelham Bay, but most Bronx residents don't, right? And creating a greenway network could help address those disparities and help make the Bronx a better place for everyone to live. Okay. And nothing done for us without us is really for us. You know, so we need to be a part, as Mundo said, we need to be a part of the process, and we don't want Bronx residents to get displaced in this, but improving it.
It's fantastic.
For us.
So everybody, I want you to first give this panel and their passion a huge hand. When you hear that a greenway starts with a community, you get a whole new Bronx way of doing things. And we really need to remember that. We're from the Bronx. We do things differently. We have to. Because what Edmundo and Chauncey and everybody has said is so powerful. When you go generations watching other boroughs and other communities have nice goodies like greenways, you get the message that greenways are for them, not for us. And then you start to accept, and then you start to suffer from all those things that impact, that have public health impacts and morale and educate, all those recreational benefits that come with a greenway. We are not going to let that happen, are we? Because we deserve exactly what every New Yorker has, and that's a borough unified by greenways. And when we hear community advocates reminding us that we deserve exactly what everyone else has, I hope that we bring that to our next 30 years of greenway planning. So I have to tell you, personally, it has been an absolute honor and privilege to be associated with BCQ because of that 30 years of run-up to this point, but it's even a greater honor to be among great greenway advocates on this panel and in this room, who I know are going to make the next 30 years the best years of greenway planning. So we have one more little goodie for you, and that's that we have a survey which really we want to get the temperature, so to speak, of your greenway repair, community issues, what you want from a greenway, and we are going to bring this to DOT and DPR in their planning. You can take that survey, and then are we going to still come back, MLC, we'll be back at 4 for the full results, and we're going to head over there for networking. But thanks a lot, everybody. We're actually early. We have more time to network, and we'll see you back here at 4. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.